हेलो फ्रेंड्स। तो फाइनली हम आ गए हैं शिकागो में और इस समय हम हैं नेवी पियर पे, क्योंकि ये एक टूरिस्ट प्लेस है और यहीं से हम राइड लेने वाले हैं क्रूज़ की। और क्रूज़ की राइड लेंगे तो उस समय जो आप पीछे सारा डाउनटाउन बिल्डिंग्स देख रहे हैं उसकी अच्छी अच्छी इमेजेस पिक्चर्स ले पाएंगे। और ये हमारा जिस जगह हम हैं इस समय, ये देखो, ये सब पियर का एरिया है। ये इसको नेवी पियर बोलते हैं। जैसे सैन फ्रांसिस्को में है पियर 39, पियर 29 जो फेमस पियर है, उसी तरह से यहाँ पर भी है। तो चलो आगे बढ़ते हैं। ये सामने
World War II industrial building modeled to look like a river barge. Now let me tell you about the old building they tore down. It wasn't pretty. Nobody cried when it went away. Most people thought it was an eyesore. I don't care. It was history. And in Chicago, you don't forget where you came from. So is that cool? Yep, they salvaged the very walls of the General Growth building that they destroyed. They gave them a second life as part of the Riverwalk design. Now we have great Art Deco on either side of us, beginning on our right with the Chicago Daily News building. Nicknamed the Great Chicago Sphinx in 1929, the clock towers being the paws, the rest being the body. Did you know there was a bit of an Egyptomania? Egyptology was a big influence on Art Deco because King Tutankhamun's tomb was opened in 1922. And you know, the Great Sphinx, the picture was in the newspapers all the time. You could almost say back then, the Great Sphinx was a meme. But sadly, when Doctor Who and I were in 1922, no one knew what a meme was. And on our left, also Art Deco is the Civic Opera building. I call it a perfect marriage of pragmatism and art. Start with your opera house, but surround yourself with corporate towers. So if the play doesn't do so well, the opera's the landlord to the business tenants. I'm always asked, why does it say Civic Opera building with a V instead of a U? It's still building. That's a pre-16th century Latin alphabet. You see that a lot in old buildings where the V can replace the U. Now after 1930, architecture in America takes a holiday for about 25 years due to the Great Depression followed by World War II. And then the 50s into the 60s, all those architects from the Bauhaus in Germany, the modernists, come over to the States. And by 1965, welcome to the Mad Men advertising age. Black box modernism is the order of the day. I welcome you now to Gateway Center. Now this is an air rights project surrounding our train station, Union Station. You're gonna see the trains. And I have a photo for you. This is the photo. I'm going to give you the evolution of modern architecture over 30 years by one firm, Skidmore, Owings & Merrill. These three buildings, that's what you want to get a photo of. Black box, white box, and mirrored building. They're going forward in time. It literally is a time machine. Join me in the time machine of architecture. It was the 3rd of June, another dusty, sleepy Delta day. Ode to Billy Joe, Bobby Gentry, 1967. And black box modernism was the order of the day. We would see a slight change when we entered the decade of the 1970s. Well, there's a port on a western bay and it serves, hey, 100 ships a day. It's the 70s, man. And that means international style, the white building, Gateway 3. I would bet every person on this boat a sandwich that no matter where you live on planet Earth, you probably know an office building almost identical to that. Did you know? Because the international style was born out of fear. The fear was that the future was moving way too fast. We wouldn't be able to determine what businesses might need. Better be safe, better be neutral. Put everyone around the world in the same building, a bland box, and just do that box over and over and over again. And in the 70s, when the international style was modernizing cities around the globe, you know what? You might wake up in a foreign city hotel room, look out your window and say, I think I'm experiencing deja vu, like I've been here before, but you've never been there before. It's just that every city looked like every other city. But this is Tuesday, this must be Belgium. Let's jump right into the 80s now. I'll stop the world and melt with you. And it's Gateway 4, full circle. Contextualism or postmodernism. The curve follows the curve of the river. The beveled glass, while it cuts down on solar glare, also affords us an almost abstract expressionistic or Jackson Pollock action painting style of reflection of the architecture around it. Let's go to the little building with a map on our left. I gotta tell you something. Before they put the map on the side of this building, we tour guides never talked about it. It did not excite us. So I think the owner sat down 10 years ago and said, hey, let's spend $800,000 and do a navigational map of the river and put ourselves upon it. That'll make those tour guides talk. Well, guess what? It worked. Look at that red block. You are here. Welcome to 300 South Wacker, the You Are Here building. That's the building, and you're on the river right there. It's better than GPS. Now on our right, we come to the old Chicago Central Post Office, sleek Art Deco and massive. Remember I mentioned adaptive reuse, taking an old building, give it new life? This is the biggest example I know in the United States right now. The old Maine Post Office had a $900 million price tag. Now, little history. 2.7 million square feet. I see you. I recognize you as human beings. Everybody wants to be noticed, acknowledged. So the old post office, 2.7 million square feet, 1921, largest post office on earth, booyah. We needed that space because the mail order catalog business was invented in Chicago by that friend of the farmer, A. Montgomery Ward, followed by Sears and Roebuck. A lot of mail rolled down those halls. We were the Amazon of the day. But elevator buildings tended to slow down the mail. Waiting for elevators could feel like waiting for Godot, as a friend of the playwright Beckett might say. Who knows when they're going to show up? The post office moves out in 1995. The building lies fallow and unused for 20 years. And then a New York City firm shows up. I do my homework. 601 West Coast of New York had a big hand developing the west side of Manhattan in New York City. I say, this is pretty cool. They got a track record. Let's watch them go. And when they come to town, they go to town. Securing Walgreens corporate as an anchor tenant, followed by Uber Freight and Pepsi Cola, abandons their 16-story home, says we like you better, and moves in. That's not even the cool part. The cool part, and you can see this if you do the Willis Tower sky deck and look down, is that the entire roof has miniature paddleball tennis courts for the employees and a living roof of green prairie grass. And that allowed them to achieve, has anyone heard of LEED certification yet? That stands for Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. It's actually answering the question, how can we produce less waste? How can you do a smaller carbon footprint? Look to your left, zoom, the tall buildings drop off because the business district, the loop, is behind you now. And you had borders back in the day. The river was north, the lake was east, south, unless you had railroad. No standing on the bench, please. Thank you. You had railroad tracks. Chicago couldn't sprawl out, so we sprawled up. And I got to give a shout out to Mr. Otis and the Otis Elevator Company, right? For coming up with the elevator brakes, which made the skyscraper possible. Oh, I had a gentleman from Minneapolis, Minnesota. He gets off the boat one day and he says, hey, Kevin, Otis Elevator has a regional office in the city of Minneapolis. I said, do tell. He said, it's very, very sad. I said, oh, why is that? And he said, because Otis Elevator Minneapolis is housed in a one-story building. They're an elevator company, and they don't have an elevator. This is called irony. Now, if you lived here, you'd be home by now. Because of things like the Riverwalk, the city is alive. People are moving back into the heart of the city. The swank is high-end living is the street filling up pretty fast, and it's right next to the Pioneer buildings in 1986's River City. The curve of that building tells you that's only one man could do that. Bertrand Goldberg, can you see it? But that's the same architect that did those corncob towers we saw at the top of the tour. Goldberg was a modernist who thought outside the box. No one did say that. He wrote this journal in the 1960s that rebelled against the century of static and the straight line. I refuse to remake humanity in the image of a machine. And then he would be the greatest free-thinking architect. Does anyone remember the man from Barcelona, Spain, Antonio Gaudi, who famously said, there are no right angles in nature? Hey folks, I'm gonna sit down for a moment. You know why? It's story time. Gather around the campfire, boys. Gather around the campfire. Let old tour guide Kevin tell you this. The story of Chicago is the story of turning a debit into an asset. We took the great Chicago fire and turned that into the birthplace of the skyscraper. It all went down a half mile west. Have your cameras ready on the right to take a picture of the Chicago Fire Academy's antenna over on DeKalb Street, where by dawn's early light or twilight's last gleaming, firefighters get their training. And why do I want you to take a picture of that antenna? Because that's some sacred geology, some sacred geometry right over there. Because where do you think they built the Firefighters Academy, boyo? But right on top of Patrick and Catherine O'Leary's barn. Do you hear what I'm saying? Firefighters are over there right now learning how to stop a fire at the very same point where Daisy, the O'Leary cow, maybe kicked over the kerosene lantern and started the Great Chicago Fire. Now, sure, that was the O'Leary barn, and sure, there really was a Mrs. O'Leary selling milk in the neighborhood. She had 5 cows. They were all named Daisy. But no, she and her cows were framed. They were innocent. They had nothing to do with the fire. I come before you today and I say, forgive the cow, free Daisy. Do you want to know the truth? You can't handle it. Yeah, you can handle the truth. We will never know what caused the Great Chicago Fire. In a city made entirely out of wood with no building regulations, fires happened every day. The story about the cow was made up by a newspaper reporter named Michael Ahern. He admitted it, interviewed during the World's Fair of 1893. He made it up 2 weeks after the fire on a slow news day, but it was too late. The legend of the cow took on a life of its own, and every October 8th, that anniversary of the fire, hordes of little kids would march over to the O'Leary barn and pelt it with rocks and sticks and stones, yelling, "Bad cow." Better late than never. It was October 6, 1997, 2 days before the anniversary of the fire. Chicago City Council meets and says, that's it. We have been listening to that silly story, blaming that poor cow for 100 years. We will put it to bed, we will bury it. So they had Chicago historians come forward offering public testimony. In their hands, the original depositions Mrs. O'Leary had given to the police in 1871. They proved that Mrs. O'Leary and her cows were sleeping that Sunday night at 9 p.m. when the fire started. And maybe you should leave her alone and look at the O'Leary's neighbor instead. Now, who was the O'Leary's neighbor, you may well ask? Good question. A shady guy, a man of questionable character who went by the name, you ready? Peg Leg Sullivan. Yes, the man who reports our greatest disaster is named Peg Leg. And now the theory puts forth the question, what is Daniel Peg Leg Sullivan doing snooping around his neighbors, the O'Leary's barn, in the middle of the night when that fire just happens to flare up? He's looking for cerveza. He's trying to steal the O'Leary's keg of beer. We now believe he starts a small fire as a distraction to his beer-stealing crime. It gets out of control. At any rate, Mrs. O'Leary and her cows were exonerated of all guilt. The city issued forth a formal proclamation and handed it to Mrs. O'Leary's living descendants on that very day. I gotta say, huzzah! Huzzah! Hooray for cows. Welcome to Chicago, or if need be, talk to me. I'll get you pardoned for your bovine. Now that fire never leaves my mind. In fact, that Great Chicago Fire resides here in my pineal gland. It opens my third eye. I'm having an epiphany. The Great Chicago Fire was such a turning point for the city's history. It gives even we present-day Chicagoans our spirit, mettle, and will. Can I paint you a little picture? Look in front of you. Imagine it's October 7th, 1871, the day before the Great Chicago Fire, and you look at the vast and wondrous skyline of Chicago. Now do this with me. Close your eyes and open and blink. And 36 hours later, 1/3 of that skyline, are you ready for the number? 17,450 buildings disappear in a day and a half, a puff of smoke. That is the Great Chicago Fire. The builders don't wait. The fire happens on Sunday night. By dawn's early light Tuesday, as it burns out, they're standing in the ashes of the fire district where only 14 buildings stop the horizon. But they look north from where the Wrigley Building stands today and where you can walk in 12 minutes down the magnificent mile from the Wrigley Building, Michigan, to Michigan and Chicago. You will come upon a little yellow castle called the Water Tower. You won't miss it. It looks like the rook from a chess set. The Water Tower was built in 1869 as a standpipe for the water pumping station across the street. Well, guess what? 2 years later, when the Great Chicago Fire came roaring downtown like a dragon, the Water Tower stood up like St. George and said, "No thanks. I'm a Chicagoan, I'll stick it out." It escaped the fire without a scratch. And the next morning, the builders gather en masse, gazing up at the Water Tower, all about it laying ash and rubble. And that sign of hope causes them to say, we will rebuild. This is Sitte, leading to Chicago's motto forevermore, I will. And the I will spirit goes on to give us the tallest building in the world for 24 years. In front of you now, the Sears Willis Tower. Old school Chicagoans like myself always knew that as Sears Tower, even when they moved to the suburbs. It was tradition. But in 2009, London-based insurance brokerage, the Willis Group, took over only 3 of 110 stories, and the city let them rename it Willis Tower without asking us. This was a hard pill to swallow, but I finally have come around. I can accept that that building is now known as Willis Tower. You spell that word W-I-L-L-I-S. But if you're a Chicagoan, you pronounce that word Sears. That's how you say it. It's 1,451 feet. The architect Bruce Graham, and from Pakistan, Bangladesh area, Dr. Fazler Khan, first engineering partner for Skidmore, Owings and Merrill. A bundle of sticks in their head becomes the bundle tube construction. Number nine. Contiguous steel tubes, each 75 foot square. 2 stop at 50 floors, 2 at 66, 3 at 90, the final 2 110 stories. You reduce the mass of the building because you're in the Windy City. Although the Windy City nickname had nothing to do with wind, it referred to our early politicians. They would never shut up. They were always bragging about how great Chicago was. They were like me, full of hot air. But it is a windy city with 81 mile an hour winds. You must deal with this. I look at the Sears Tower every day and I think about the wind. And I remember the words of the great Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu, writing in the Tao Te Ching. Can one be flexible, follow the way of nature, yield and overcome? Like the Tao, the Sears Tower can sway 18 inches left to right if need be. That's its sway factor, 3 feet. Friends, 45 degrees, you're right. Peter and Ella of France grace us with a wonderful mural. The Native American lost in Chicago dreaming. And the eye of the dreamer seems to lead us to look to Ceres, the Roman goddess of grain, perched atop the Art Deco Board of Trade 1930. At 605 feet, that remained the tallest building in Chicago for 35 years. Now, the sculptor John Storrs never gave Ceres a face. You can be nose to nose with the statue of Ceres when you do the IMAX movie at Navy Pier, Chicago Flyover 3D. Oh, by the way, I must name the artist John Storrs every tour I give for the rest of my life. You know why? One day I did not name the artist. And on that very day, a young man stepped off the boat showing me his driver's license and politely asking, "Hi, Kevin, I was wondering why you did not talk about my grandfather." I promised John Storrs 3, John 1 would be with me for eternity. Now, I told that story one day in 2020, as a matter of fact. 2 young guys were waiting for me after the tour, smiling. They said, "Kevin, we want to thank you for mentioning our grandfather, Dr. Fazler Khan, the engineer at the Sears Tower. Met his grandson. History lives in Chicago." Another world record is the Pink Tower right in front of the Sears Tower, 311 South Wacker, 1990. Postmodern in a style called Castellated Gothic, and it's world record. When it was built, it was the tallest concrete reinforced posted steel building in the world. Gaze, oh, look at that. What a silhouette. Let us gaze in meditation at the west face of the Sears Tower. And as you gaze skyward, friends, I would ask you to imagine that you are French. Your name is Alain Robert, but the whole world knows you better as French Spider-Man. I follow Alain Robert on Facebook these days. He's climbed every tall building in the known universe. It was August 1999. Comes right there, the west face of the Sears Tower. T-shirts, sweatpants, rubber-soled shoes, no climbing equipment. Little hook on his belt in case he wants to take a nap halfway up. Amazing, this spot. A little over 2 hours, he's up on the roof. And then it was the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco, California. Home to Paris, he hops up the Eiffel Tower. Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. Petronas Towers. Taipei 101, Taiwan. And then the tallest building in the world today by Chicago architect Adrian Smith, the Burj Khalifa of Dubai, and they allow him to climb all 2,717 feet. Consider the mind of building climber Alain Robert, how he must look at the universe. Architecture sometimes is in the eye of the beholder. For you and I offer this definition. Architecture is the way that you and I interpret, define, and design. interpret, define, and design the space we live in and inhabit. We gaze up at the Sears Tower and we maybe have first thoughts of beauty or function. Now, our friend the daredevil, Alain Robert, would sneak up behind me, look at the same building and say, "Hey, Kevin, all I can see is another obstacle to help me overcome my greatest fear in life." What do you think the daredevil building climber is most afraid of? Heights. He's afraid of heights. He's had 40 years of climbing skyscrapers. He's literally scared all the time. I said, "Dude, I'm getting you a new therapist. We'll work that out." Hey, look up and wave though. Look up, look up, look up. Who's gonna go to the sky deck? Everybody go to the sky deck. That's for you, the Willis Tower sky deck. It's a glass box on the 103rd floor with a glass floor you see all the way down. I can only speak from personal experience. I can only compare my visit to the Willis Tower sky deck with the Schrodinger's cat experiment in quantum physics. There's only two possible outcomes. In one universe, you look through that glass floor, 1,353 feet straight down, and you might say, "This is pretty cool. I'm walking on air." Unless you're me, living in the universe next door. And when I look through that glass floor, 1,353 feet straight down, I say, "Not cool. Where's the bathroom, please?" I like the boats. I'll highly recommend the Sky Deck experience. That's only 5 minutes of a 2-hour ticket. So I don't care if you go out on the ledge, just look out the windows. The real gem is the immersive Chicago Museum they just added in the mezzanine halfway up. Hey, let's go to the building with the serrated corners shaped like the letter U. This happens to be the former Chicago Mercantile Exchange Center, and it is my favorite engineering story on the river. Who's ready for engineering? All right, let's do it. So, the Chicago Mercantile Exchange merged with the Board of Trade and they left. Before that happened, when this building was first built, it was two 40-story office towers. Remember, with a 40,000 square foot financial trading floor, right? Like in the old movie Wall Street. Buy, sell, traders throwing hand signals. So you don't want any columns getting in the way of those trader signals. So instead, the entire weight of the ceiling struts is supported by the load-bearing walls on each end. However, look what they did to increase office space. The top 34 stories are expanded out. Okay, Houston, we have a problem. The towers are now too heavy. They're going to shift. You just invited Mr. Gravity to the party. Let us go from the towers to my own arms for time-lapse photography. If you don't address the extra weight of those towers, in 5 years, you could see the towers end up like this. A bad version of that toy block game Jenga. Now, why didn't that happen? Because of mathematics. From the former Czechoslovakia, Alfred Benesch and Company was a structural engineering firm. They made a mathematical calculation. When they built those towers, beginning at the ground, every floor plate was pulled out 1/8 of an inch progressively further. Does this make sense? First floor, second floor, third, until you get to 20, that's halfway. Then you push each floor back in, effectively giving your towers a camber, an artificial bow. It's going to disappear. They did the math. Gravity will actually do the heavy work. And as suspected, as the building settled, it pushed itself back into a plumb line, a straight line. So a quick recap, if you left it alone, till it did. You bow it out, it made it go straight. Let's come back to the 150 North Riverside building and come under the bridge. You know, I do subscribe to my own theories. The nicknames help you understand the building. But you kind of got to choose the right one. And I heard 3 nicknames for this 2017 building. The first person seeing it coming to a pound finally exclaimed, we could think of it as the Guillotine building. I said, I can see that. No, that's a terrible nickname. The second person said tuning fork. I said, you're closer. But when the third person, noticing the V shape, mind holding the stem of fine glassware, and began to sway slowly back and forth and say, why don't we think of it as the rather generous Martini building? I said, this is the perfect nickname. Because the same way a person holding a martini drink most likely is going to sway back and forth. What do you think this building did under its wind test? It wants to sway. And they are countering the sway of the building. Agua, water. At the top of this building, they installed 12 water tanks, which hold on site 160,000 gallons of water when needed, up to 160,000 gallons of water. Now the fancy name for that is inertial slosh mass dampers. And you know what? I think the name is more complicated than the principle going on there. Inertial slosh mass dampers. Because what happens? The wind and the building starts going this way. Well, what's the water in the tanks doing? It's going towards the opposite wall. That's bringing back the flow. Hey, the Great Lakes building on your right, great example of Chicago school warehouse design. It's a very historic. Right there in 1860 was the Wigwam, a rickety wood building erected in 5 weeks to host the Republican National Presidential Convention. What I'm telling you, on these very walls, one Mr. Abraham Lincoln received the nomination to run for the presidency. And where you see the people enjoying the Adirondack chairs, in 1833 you would have stumbled into a log cabin hotel called the Sauganash. Described as a barracks with a pig wallow for a street. Sauganash is Native American Potawatomi for English-speaking Canadian. But Sauganash wasn't run by that gentleman Caldwell, no, but by his best friend, the French-Canadian by way of Detroit fiddle player, Marc Beaubien, who would play the fiddle in that hotel and say, I fiddle like a devil, keep a hotel like hell. Hey. 13 electors sat down in Marc Beaubien's hotel in 1833. They took a vote to become a city. 12 yay, 1 nay. So Chicago's birthday, March 4th, 1837. And standing on that ground today, the beautiful Nuveen building, where movie fans, this is very important, that is where Ferris Bueller's dad worked and watched the parade in the most popular teen movie comedy in Chicago. It was called Ferris Bueller's Day Off from the 80s. It's in every cable TV network, like every day now. In the movie, Matthew Broderick as Ferris Bueller and his friends skip school, and they go to the Sears Tower. Now you can go to the Sears Tower and stand in Matthew Broderick's footprints and lean your head against the glass and recreate the scene. And to really do it right, skip school and go to the Sears Tower and do that. On our left now, friends, we come back to the Merchandise Mart. Those heads along the bank are not, as comedian David Letterman tried to claim the Pez Candy Hall of Fame, but Merchant Princes of early Chicago, added by Joe Kennedy. Now, public art upgrades a city's life, and the Merchandise Mart is committed to 30 years of public art. You can check it out tonight. At sundown, it's going to be 9 p.m. tonight, a little after sundown, the entire face of the mart becomes an artist's canvas. The bank of movie projectors will be projecting the work right there. If you will go to artonthemart.com, that will give you who the artist is and sync up your cell phone for the soundtrack. This is such a wonderful thing, and I love it that it's going on for 30 years. When it opened 5 years ago, first thing I saw was a herd of zebra cantering across the face of the building. But the best night, absolute best night, my favorite Mexican painter, Frida Kahlo, larger than life right there. And that brings me to the River Walk. Look at those little areas of green on your right, those bed and breakfasts for fish, I'm not kidding. Fish hotels bring fish back to the river, meaning making the river more conducive. 70 species have returned to the river, and some of them eat pollution right out of the water. We're going to turn this river around yet. I want to give a big shout out to Carol Ross Barney, the woman architect who designed the Riverwalk as of 2016 thematically. She was building upon the work of Daniel Burnham. Look how her water park does not overtake Burnham's influence with the Obelisk lamppost, very Parisian in nature. You see, Daniel Burnham was a student of history who watched the great cities around the world rise up along rivers because a river offered you industry, wealth, and spirit. But often industry on the water would transfer to land, and you would watch a river go from industrial to recreational. You see what I'm getting at? Burnham saw our future. He wrote the plan of Chicago so we could have what's happening in the Riverwalk today. And friends, it's time for another book recommendation. I've been thinking a lot about public space. I'm reading the great historian Irene Vallejo. Her book is called Papyrus. It's about how we first started writing. So, I'm reading about Ptolemy and the great library at Alexandria, Egypt and Museum, which at that time in the world was an attempt to bring all books and knowledge into one place. I had an epiphany. Civilization simply arises out of the exchange of ideas. Well, for Chicago, the great library of Alexandria just may be the Chicago Riverwalk. And that exchange of ideas is up to you, and you, and you, the people of the world. Is that a high ideal? Of course it is. Can we reach it on the Riverwalk with your help every day? Go over to the Riverwalk, introduce yourself, start a conversation. Now friends, I gotta tell you something. If you're doing a skyscraper in the modernist tradition, don't go overboard celebrating structure, because you might slip into this style, brutalism. Right there, 55 West Wacker Drive, or as my friend and fellow tour guide Keegan Reed would say, Danny DeVito between two supermodels. Now, brutalism comes from a French phrase, a béton brut, or raw concrete. The brutalists were modernists on steroids, right? They celebrate structure, but why would you do that? Why would you go so overboard, ponderous and heavy? Because you want to give your institution inside that building a sense of gravitas, of lasting forever. So that's a style. Think about it. Where do you see it? University campuses, public institutions, libraries. On a lighter note, 35 West Wacker Drive next door, home to Leo Burnett Advertising, looks like a Greek column. Irish architect Kevin Roche is remembering Louis Sullivan, father of the Chicago School, who likened a skyscraper to a Greek column. 3 words again: base, shaft, capital. And every building starts with a solid foundation or base, soaring vertical shaft, roof or capital area, as Louis wrote, every inch a prominent soaring thing. 45 degrees to your right, you see a dark green Art Deco building with a real 24-karat gold cap. Looks like a bottle of champagne. Today, the Pindri Hotel, but the champagne design may have been intentional. It dates back to Prohibition, the freewheeling 1920s, when legally you couldn't pop a cork on the bottom of bubbly. Designed by the Burnham brothers, Dan Jr. and Hugh, for Union Carbide. Many people think the champagne design was actually a bit of editorial comment on the era. And my friends, the potential of the Riverwalk was fully realized with this park on our right in 2005. For this park is our Illinois-Vietnam War Veterans Memorial Fountain and Wall of Names. It is a favorite of Chicagoans for a moment of quiet repose. And like an Apollo rocket, look at that, the skinniest skyscraper in Chicago, 75 East Wacker Drive, only 9.5 foot across that octagonal crown. Now that skinny Apollo building, the Jewelers building, the Champagne Bottle building, and the Wrigley building, they all have something in common. All 4 are clad with terracotta. The same terracotta that you might use for potted plants was the most popular cladding material for skyscrapers after the fire, because being fired clay meant fire-proof. But you know what's cooler than that? You can color and glaze terracotta, use it like an artist. Did you ever actually watch a painter work a canvas? In my bohemian youth, I moved in with a painter. She taught me a lot, and a little bit about painting as well. Now the great painters have something in common: shading technique. Look at the Wrigley building. Diversity of color is more interesting to the eye. Nuance, that's where art lies. So Charles Biersman wields a terracotta tile the way a fine artist wields a brush, using 6 different shades to bring that building out and make it more interesting. Next, like a Gothic Cathedral Tribune Tower, 1922, Colonel McCormick of the Chicago Tribune newspaper offered $100,000 to get the world's most beautiful office building, housing it in New York, when inspired by the Gothic cathedrals of France and Belgium. The newspaper moves out, Tribune Tower goes condominium. You may live there for $700,000 to $7 million. I invite you to join me and the rest of my passengers as we pool resources, acquire the penthouse, change our name to the Addams family. We are going to be living up there in Gothic splendor. Okay, I got your mile walk ready. Are you ready? Start at the Wrigley building, go downstairs for lunch to the Billy Goat Tavern. Inspiration for a famous John Belushi Saturday Night Live sketch. Cheeseburger, 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 no fries, chips, no Pepsi, Coke, and you can still get that legendary cheeseburger today. You stand at eye level with the Tribune Tower, and you will find a piece of the Taj Mahal, the Great Wall of China, Westminster Abbey, Notre Dame, and the Alamo before your very eyes. You keep walking until you find the water tower that escaped the fire. I'll give a nod to NBC. NBC Tower. From Adrian Smith, who went on to the tallest building in the world, postmodern, Art Deco, harkening back to 30 Rock in New York City. And friends, at this point, I must ask you to look 90 degrees. We do not want to miss the first of Chicago's giants, formerly the John Hancock Center. There she blows. This is my favorite modernist building. Bruce Graham, Dr. Fausta Khan before the Sears Tower. Sears Tower might be taller. That's their work of art. You want to go over and see Big John from its base on your own. Look, I'm trying to give you a cheap thrill. It won't cost a penny. And after shopping the Magnificent Mile, you will not have any pennies left anyway. So all you have to do, broke and free, stand on the street below Big John, gaze skyward for 30 seconds, allow the euphoria to carry you away. You will feel like you are flying, even though your feet are on the ground, for this is the power of art and architecture to move us. Are you feeling adventurous? Look this up on your cell phone, Chicago 360. There awaits you on the 95th floor an observation deck called Chicago 360. It's a glass box with 8 windows. Now you actually get in standing up, holding onto roll bars like a roller coaster at Great America. And then 7 other guinea pigs join you. And they start the hydraulic motor, and the box comes out of the building and tilts you 30 degrees into thin air. No one knows why. Okay, I know it's for great office. It's for great views and all that. It's not my cup of tea. Hey, if you would look in the background behind Harry Weiss's triangular Swiss hotel, we're going to see Jeannie Gang's first skyscraper from 2009, Aqua Tower, half Blue Radisson Hotel and half condos. Now, if you look closely, no 2 balconies are exactly alike. Louis Sullivan of Chicago School famously said, "Form follows function. Use determines design." The function for Jeannie Gang was that every single floor should have a unique view of Chicago. So the form, those balconies, were determined from the outside in. Jeannie and her assistant set up an entire tabletop model of downtown Chicago. And every time they found a great view, they would point a laser pointer back towards the model of Jeannie's building. If the laser pointer went directly in a window, everything's copacetic, as Bojangles' Bill Robinson used to say, everything's cool. But if it hit the wall, then Jeannie said, "Well, take that balcony. We do not have to be symmetrical. Move it over 2 feet. Pull that one in, push that one out." And they went around the whole building, adjusting, giving everyone great views. Form follows function. There's a beautiful fountain coming up on our left, Centennial Fountain. Designed by Ludwig Mies van der Rohe's grandson, Dirk Lohan, in 1989 to commemorate the Chicago Metropolitan Water Reclamation District. And that group, my friends, achieved one of the 7 engineering wonders of the United States. They caused this river you've been on for the last hour and 15 minutes in 1900 to reverse its natural current and flow backwards away from the lake. A little history, Chicago. The name of the river comes from the Native American Chautauqua, which a Potawatomi gentleman translated for us as "Man, that river stinks," probably because of the wild onions growing up and down the bank. In 1673, Father Marquette and Louis Joliet arrived here exploring for France. The river guide showed them a shortcut through the continent, that at the end of the south branch of this river, Portage or Canoe, the southern flowing Des Plaines River, Illinois River, and Big Muddy, the Mississippi, meaning Chicago became the critical link in a waterway system connecting the entire continental United States. The 1848 Illinois-Michigan Canal made Chicago a boomtown. By 1890, 1 million people were living and working here. But 1 million people and being hog butchered to the world, with our Union stockyards on the south side, immortalized in Upton Sinclair's novel, The Jungle. All the meatpacking plants and people use the river as a sewer, polluting Lake Michigan, causing repeated typhoid and cholera epidemics. So to stop the river from polluting the lake, in 1900, after 11 years of planning and 8 years of digging, we opened a second canal. And the Chicago sanitary and ship canals dredge so deep off the South Branch, we take out more dirt than the Suez Canal. We take out more dirt than the Panama Canal. And using gravity as an aid, thank you, Sir Isaac Newton. Water flows downhill, we cause the river to flow backwards. Yay! We save our drinking water, Lake Michigan, and we send the pollution south to our neighbors in St. Louis, Missouri instead. Now, as promised for my St. Louis friends, I promised I would apologize for that. Sorry about that. My bad. We've been trying to get the river cleaner ever since. Now, just east of Lakeshore Drive, there will always only be one skyscraper. Lake Point Tower, this fidget spinner building from 1968, was controversial because of its location. It's east of DuSable Lakeshore Drive. and the lakefront is the people's land. It should remain forever open, free, and clear of buildings and other obstructions. That's how the ordinance reads. So how do you get a private building on public space? You find a loophole. And the loophole was upgrades to harbor facilities. That ain't a harbor building, that's a private condo. In other words, developers jumped on the chance that they could build anything at all, and they got away with it, causing the cities to go, give me that ordinance back. And the city made an ordinance immediately. So it now states in very specific language, no more multi-story buildings allowed east of the drive. Don't get me wrong, I love that building, it's a work of art. We just don't want to leave private buildings in public space. And in front of you, we're separated from the lake by a physical barrier, the Chicago Lock, as its name implies, holding in fresh water since 1938, when every Great Lakes state and Canada, oh Canada, sued Chicago for reversing the river. The Navy line the fresh water of the planet to drain the feather to the Gulf. We monitor that now. And like a cat with many lives, we come back to Navy Pier, part of Burnham's original plan. Arcade and Freight Pier 1916, World War II naval training base, 1,500 Navy pilots, 2 aircraft carriers called the Wolverine and the Sable. That is why the hotel takes its name Sable Hotel today. After the war, college campus, University of Illinois, Chicago, 46 to 65. But by 1990, the infrastructure was crumbling. The pier closed down for 5 years and reinvented themselves as a recreational pier again, complete with Ferris wheel, which is so appropriate for the inventor, George Washington Gale Ferris was the man's name. Put up the first amusement wheel to bear his name, Ferris wheel, at our Columbian Exposition, 1893. And one picture's worth 1,000 words. Friends, I give you the Chicago skyline. I'm going to take a break and rehydrate. My friend, no sitting on the back of the rail. My friend, you got to get down from there. Tell that little boy to sit down, please. Thank you. That's better. Last chance to use the restrooms. Now, you can come up and take pictures with the skyline behind you if you want. Move about the boat now. But when I come back to the mic, you will hear me say, please take your